guys who know me, my name is Angie Jones. I do wellness coaching here, and part of what got me into even the healthcare realm was wanting to learn about nutrition and how food gets its nutrients, how do we get our nutrients, and then from there realizing nutrient-dense foods don't happen without a biologically rich soil. So it got me kind of down this path of realizing that if we don't have our soils alive, there's no way that we're gonna have, if we can't get our soils to be full of diverse vitality, our microbiome, we have more bacterial cells than we do human cells. Like by a good 300 trillion. Like there's so much more of us that is related to this connection. And I'll be talking about this throughout the class, but to understand why I kind of went down this path of understanding microbiology and understanding how our plants grow, that's kind of what started it off, as wanting to take care of my health, wanting to live with vitality, and realizing if my food isn't grown with this diverse microbiome, this diverse soil microbiome, then I'm not gonna have that diversity and that resilience. So today, I'm just kind of telling you about some gardening methods, but I really, really wanna sell you on the idea of whether you are at your own garden, whether you are out at a park, whether you are just smelling the flowers out of the window that you just opened up for the first time this spring, taking the time to enjoy God's design, taking the time to enjoy nature versus feel like, oh, this is this chore, this is this burden to have a garden, to have all this work I gotta do. Let's enjoy the journey of life, because that is God's design, in my opinion. So I have this little thing on here because, again, nutrition is mind, body, spirit. I think the why exemplifies that many times, where it says, so I say, when you smell a flower, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins are released, and the limbic system is activated. So smelling nature can relieve stress and anxiety, reduce pain, increase alertness and mental clarity, and promote feelings of calmness by shifting the body into a parasympathetic, a calming state. So just know that there is so much to your health to be said about taking the time to garden, touching the earth. That's why you see even allergies reduce when people are living in combination with nature and not ever touching outside or being outdoors. So our microbiome is so affected not only by what we're eating, but what we're smelling, with the sunlight we're getting, being outdoors, being in a diversity of areas. So just know that even if you're doing a small little garden at your own house, everywhere you can go, you can be enjoying the benefits of gardening. So a little bit more history about me. About 2020, I decided I wanted to go and learn more about soil microbiology, because I thought this is the missing link. This is the thing that is like the reason we have allergies, the reason we have all of these issues with our food, and then therefore the issues with ourselves, the infertility. I just think there's so much connection with where our food is grown and how our health is and how our community is. When you think about depression, anxiety, neural inflammation, those two always go together, and that neural inflammation being part of your bacteria. So the Soil Food Web School, Dr. Elaine Ingham, that's where I went to study microbiology, and I got through her course. I graduated with her honors and distinction in April of 2022. Dr. Elaine Ingham was actually a University of Oregon professor for 40 years. She went to a UN conference and did a biosafety analysis presentation for some of her research, saying, hey, some of these fertilizers, some of these things that are on the market are literally ruining our country, literally ruining our world's health. And after she came back from that conference, her university administrators told her she could no longer do those kind of studies. So that's where she started the Soil Food Web School. And that's where I'm saying, if you want to take more time to learn more about the microbiology, which obviously it's easy for me to talk about. I get down that rabbit hole, so I'm sorry, I'm reeling it in. But if you want to learn more about that, thesoilfoodweb.com is a great resource, and that's her baby. That's what she started. And she works with farmers all throughout the world, all the continents, and helping them go from clay to sand to whatever they got going on, to growing beautiful foods, especially in Africa. She's doing a ton of work. I'll talk about that later in one of our methods. And then this past year, I decided to finally get my nutrition certification through Precision Nutrition. And so now I teach like our healthy habits coaching a little bit and do some wellness stuff, working specifically on like nutrition, sleep management, stress management, just taking a little bit of a step back from just the exercise, strength, mobility side of things. So yeah, I work at the Y all the time if you guys want to talk to me about any of this stuff. Now, today, maybe some of you guys have been gardening for a long time. Maybe some of us have never put a trowel in the ground. So I just want us to all come at this with that mindset of what Vincent van Gogh said. I am always doing what I cannot do yet in order to learn how to do it. And I just think that's a beautiful way to have a mindset with all of this, because I'm going to show you my backyard next and just show you kind of the transformation that took years and never really knowing exactly what it was going to turn out like. And still, I don't know what this next year is going to bring, but we're going to keep using this as an adventure for gardening. So this is a little summary of my backyard. And before, it was a huge hill coming down. You can see there's these little retaining walls on both sides and then just a slope coming down. And that's the main backyard. So pretty much no usable area, nothing, like if you want to have a fire, people were falling into the fire, it's not fun, you know, it's just one of those things, not much usable area. Then I knew we needed to do some sort of terracing. I didn't know how we were going to do it. So what we first started off with was actually water in the basement. And when we moved in there, it was realizing that our house is from 1870s, and over the years it sinks in. And so the first years, all we were doing is emergency drainage right away, those two little slits, making the water go away from the house. And then eventually, and also trimming back all these trees that are covering our roof. And that was an immediate thing, like one of the first things we did when we first moved in. But we still grew sunflowers along the side. We still had a little something to spark some joy. But then eventually our whole backyard looks like this, where we peeled back layers and graded it away from the house. So eventually we had it all seeded out, and then you could finally like grow grass and have it so that the water was draining away from the house. So now we're finally to 2020. So 2017 to 2020, it was still that hill going down. Now finally we had a month off of work and didn't know what was going on in the world, and so we started digging. So for a long time it was digging and just digging, and then all you're doing is you're taking wheelbarrows, putting them up to the top and like berming up that soil. Actually, we started off by taking it to the other corner, because one thing I knew for sure, and we're going to go through this next week when I talk about site prep, but one thing I knew in my little mind map of it all is that I wanted a little bump out over here. We already had a shed with a bunch of stuff that we couldn't fit in our house, because after 4 years we already ran out of room. But anyways, so we just kept taking soil over to the other side and digging and digging and digging and digging. I got really sick of digging, but eventually we got to the point where we were ready to put in retaining walls and put in stone. And Cameron, I said I wanted to do terracing. I knew we needed to do terracing. I had been looking into soil science at this point. I felt like I knew enough to say we needed terracing. He said, no, I don't want to take up that much room. I want to just do it all one way up. So that fall, he finished the wall with it being straight up. And guess what, next spring? Those rocks came down. So we ended up eventually here. We got to a point, and we used like pallets to help us do this retaining bits. And every single rock we got from farmer friends, from construction friends, and we picked up every single rock, put it on these trailers, strapped them down. You might have seen us going through town really slowly. Sorry if you got caught behind us. But yeah, so eventually we got it to the point where we have all these rocks terraced out, and on that last slide you can see he's putting in some of the last rocks. I was like, I better take a video of this at some point. But yeah, so he did all of the placing. He's good at that stuff. I'm not. Even when we were digging, I was really good at digging deep. I was not good at knowing when to stop digging. So he was really good at grading the things. I was good at just mass moving the muscle of the operation, let's be real. So yeah, it's just one of those things that I show you this to not be like, oh yeah, everything is perfect always. It's a long process that you don't always know where you're gonna end up, but enjoying the journey, enjoying whatever comes, and grow some plants along the way. Now, this is the gardening methods that we have on all of your papers. These are what we're gonna go through today, and know that any of these pieces, you don't have to do just one method. Almost all of these, you're gonna do some sort of combination, some sort of combo of them. So we're gonna go through each one of these. Now, if you have a smartphone and you wanna take out your camera right now and take a little, like, once you have this little square on there, take your hand and touch that square and you'll see a link pop up. If you want to pull up that link, that takes you to a copy of this presentation on your phone. And like things like that are underlined, like my website, those are all linked in that presentation. So if you want a bunch of links, go ahead and try it out. Otherwise, if you want to put your name next to your thing back there, I'll email you this presentation as well. Okay? So I'm going to give you guys a second here. I'm going to drink some water.
It's in Canva, yeah?
It is, yes. So if you have the Canva app, it'll open it up in the app for you. Yeah, that's a good, that is not a question I've gotten before, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
I just like Canva a lot.
Mhm.
I just have to go in and play.
Girl, I get you. That's me too.
I think I have a lot of presentations that are not.
I made like a little blueprint for the why, and my boss was like, how'd you do it? I'm like, Canva. Okay, are you guys ready?
Yes.
Buckle up. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, no.
Okay, so next up, the first thing we're going to talk about is, actually, before I get started in those different methods, is the key takeaway, which I also wrote on all of your papers. No matter where you are in the world, no matter your gardening method, our soil wants to be covered. Mother Nature, God's design, wants the ground covered. So whether you're doing that with wood chip, mulch, whether you are doing that with dead leaves, whether you're doing that with plants, ideally, that's why weeds are growing everywhere, is because Mother Nature's like, hey, get this ground covered, get some roots covering this, get some leaves covering this. So without going into each of the methods, know that all of them, ideally, you're covering that ground. Wherever your garden is, even if it's in a raised bed, you're covering as much of that bed with living things or things that have been living. So maybe that's shredded paper from dead, which was originally dead trees, you know? So just know that that's the biggest key principle. And now, I kind of gave you guys a hint before. This is the soil food web. This is what I'm talking about when I say diversity leads to resilience. This is not just a food chain happening above ground. You don't just have birds eating bugs, eating worms, but then below ground, you have those worms eating nematodes, eating microscopic little worms, eating bacteria. You have all of these interactions happening. So if there's one thing I like to remind people is homicide, pesticide, suicide, fungicide, anything ending in "-icide means to kill. And when I kill off that one dandelion, when I kill off that one, you know, that one, you can see a dandelion by that mouse at the very right there. And if I kill off that one thing, there is a ripple effect throughout the system of thousands of other species of things that we can't see that are getting a chain reaction from that relationship. So diversity really does lead to resilience. And unless there's something above ground that is inhibiting your photosynthesis of the preferred plant, so inhibiting the sunlight getting to your preferred plant, getting something in the ground that you prefer or keeping that ground covered is better than just having bare soil everywhere and no mulch, no covering, nothing. Now, the only caveat to anything is because nothing is a very hard line. Everything is, you know, in general, on average, balance. But I will say, in general, invasive species, if you can monitor and get rid of and put down a preferred plant versus just saying, oh, that's an invasive, I'm gonna pull it and leave that area ground, that invasive now has the perfect environment to come back. Whereas if you cover it, if you get something going in that area that you want to be in that area or something that's better than that, maybe it's not the preferred thing, but you got a lot of it, at least then you're getting that ground to move further in succession and get more of this food web going, more of these relationships happening versus pulling that plant and letting those relationships die off. So diversity leads to resilience. And this is when I work with corn and soy farmers, sometimes they don't want to spend the money on a cover crop in the winter because they think, I'm not even harvesting any of that plant. I'm not going to grow anything from it. But adding those roots is adding that diversity of a plant, adding that diversity of microbes below ground, gives them the nutrients that they would almost need from that fertilizer. So some can really reduce fertilizer use just by planting a winter plant. So think about that for our gardens too. What can I be doing to always have something growing in the garden? On my website too, and on other places you can look up like, Wisconsin year-round planting, Wisconsin year-round gardening. And you can hear from people, like there's a professional chef down in Lake Geneva. She does a great video talking about all the varieties of raspberries so that she can have raspberries going from June to November. Because it's amazing when you start to learn, hey, there's other things out there than just the June bearing. Now there's everbearing, now there's fall bearing, and like just continuously learning, I guess is what I'm saying with this, and knowing that there's always other plants out there that maybe they're going extinct, but we didn't realize it because we just took it for granted that that cool flower was growing right there. So getting to know other people in our community and learning what grows well for them. I was talking about it with people beforehand about elderberry slips and how there's one guy who's a member here. He's got the biggest elderberry bush I've ever seen. And he's like, oh yeah, if you want slips from it, cut down whatever you want. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm gonna come over there, and yeah, I'm gonna take a bunch of slips, and yeah, I'm gonna bring them here and share them with everybody else. And he loves it, because, I mean, he's an old enough guy. So just having those conversations, and I love the why for this, because you're having community connection, whether you're just putting a puzzle piece in or working out next to that person, you can get to know them and know that everybody knows something you don't. Everybody has a gardening story that's different than yours and has had a different environment than yours. And maybe we didn't all start off with like slopes and now going to rocks and whatever, but we've all learned something along the way that we can share with others. Okay, so now I'm actually gonna get into the meat potatoes. I'm not even gonna look at what the time is. 11:47. That's actually great. Okay, so this first one here, no dig, raised bed, deep bed. This is probably what majority of us want to do or think of doing when we think of traditional gardening, where you have some sort of border created, you're raising up from above the ground. This is a really nice option for a lot of people because, one, you don't have to dig in super deep and have to deal with whatever soil issues you're dealing with. You can just start above it and add to it. So you can put in your preferred soil mix versus whatever clay, sand that you're dealing. So it's nice because a lot of times too, those weed seeds that we're all growing down below, you've added only your preferentials, soil amendments to it, so you don't have to worry about those weed seeds as much. We're gonna go through it a lot more next week as far as the site prep, but knowing that you're starting off maybe with covering it with a black tarp or cardboard, something to kill off whatever is growing there immediately, and then you can kind of see on the bottom right that they start putting down either layers of cardboard and then layers of wood chip and then layers of soil and then a diversity of different materials, which you're gonna go into those different materials a lot more in the future. So I'm gonna just keep it kind of light and go through it for you. But there's a great link on here too through the presentation on starting a no dig. This is actually a guy named Charles Dowding. Oh, I have him linked up there too. And some of these he does in schools as like their school plot because it's an easier way to be right at the kids' height and get them to see it from start to finish. And they can water right at their height. Everything is kind of really accessible and divided versus chaos, which can happen if you don't have any borders built in and you just lift up. You can also kind of see these pathways. They have wood chip going through a lot of their pathways. This can be a way to just, again, differentiate one bed from the other. And you can also kind of see they maybe have 4 feet for their max width. This is so that you're never stepping into the garden. Because compaction, when you're pushing down on all those living things down below, it can eventually lead to some difference in your growth disturbance. Now, if I step in my bed, is it illegal? No. Is it a bad thing? It's not the worst thing. I mean, you think about how many years we have pastures that are getting ran over by buffalo and stuff. There's something to be said about a little bit of disturbance, but just in general, that's why we have these widths right there for raised beds. Now, another nice thing for this, and I think we have some people in the class here who are doing above ground planting beds where they aren't even having to bend down to earth's surface to add soil. They're literally raising the bed up. This is amazing for especially like handicap and seniors and just making it accessible because I don't think that a lot of us want to be squatting like for an hour, half hour, weeding, harvesting little berries, whatever. But it's definitely a nice way to look at, hey, even people into whatever age of life they are, whatever stage of life they are able to be accessible. This is a really nice PDF if you're a woodworker or if you know people who you want to have build you a raised bed. This is a really nice plan with all the measurements, all the tools, all the things linked at the bottom right there. And that's a wheelchair accessible one where you like can slide right up to it. So again, just a great way to build some accessibility and decide what your soil quality is gonna be. So instead of going in and having to dig in and amend what you already got going on, you can add above. Next, this piece is something that you can absolutely do in your raised bed. But this is what I was talking about before with the layers of different materials. So this method means adding organic material, which is anything that's been alive is organic material. So your twigs, your leaves, all your dead plants from last year, all of that can be cooked down over time, resulting in nutrient soil, rich soil that will help your plant. And why is it nutrient rich? Because those dead plants, all of those different organic materials are feeding the microbes, and the microbes are eating each other and eating those plants, and they're cycling the nutrient to your plant. Their excess waste from eating each other is actually the plant available nutrient. So I say that even if that goes over your head 100%, just know that there is a poop loop, that idea of you have that chain reaction, but instead of it being a chain, it's a web. It's a bunch of different things eating a bunch of different things, and then you're feeding that plant. So having this diversity of cardboard, and then leaves, and then compost, and then grass clippings, and then more leaves, and then maybe you're getting that bag of fertilizer, or bag of topsoil, or mushroom compost, or you know, the things that maybe are a little bit more expensive, you're mixing that in because it's a high quality. But the reason you want to mix in some of that high quality with it is because you're inoculating it with these beneficials that are gonna eventually help your plant get nutrients. Do we have questions there? Because that was kind of a complex subject. Anybody want to say anything? No? Okay, just know that if you have things come up, this is not a like, oh, easy peasy, I totally get it type of thing. What's up?
Can you do that now?
Yes, you can be totally getting things
At this
started
time?
right now. Yes. Yeah, so it depends on where your bed is and what you already have in that spot, but you could be covering it with that cardboard, killing off whatever it is, and like weighing down those corners so that that cardboard doesn't fly away. And what's nice is, especially in rain days, or if you're getting really wet days, that cardboard is gonna stay down and decompose. It's if you just have dry cardboard that it's like a paper in the wind, you know, so you wanna wet it down right away if you're doing cardboard to start that and define that space. And like some people will use we're gonna talk about this more next week, so I'm gonna try and reel it in. Yeah, go ahead.
Angie, those water tanks that were on that last.
Yeah.
Do you have to drill holes in the bottom
I
for
would.
liquid?
Great
How
question.
much? How many?
So I'm gonna talk about this when we talk about containers more, but that whenever you have a container, I'd rather you do like a lot of little holes than like 3 really big holes. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, the raised garden, the raised bed with the wooden one,
Yeah.
how deep?
So at least I would say a foot as far as your height, but know that certain plants have different root depths.
Right.
So if you're growing peas or beans, those are more shallow root depths. If you're growing tomatoes and some other any berry or bush, you're gonna want deep beds, or at least, and we're gonna talk about this a ton more next week as far as site prep, we're at least opening up that soil down below and giving it some sort of fluffing beforehand, and hopefully as well inoculating it with some diverse materials. Yeah, and I inoculate, I mean just start putting things in that area that are different than what it's just your normal soil. So like leaf clippings, compost, grass clippings, cardboard. Now, next we have a kind of just another method that some people will cover their whole bed with straw and use that as their mulching. I know for a lot of people this is nice because it's accessible. It's not like wood chips, which can kind of get a little bulky and can get in your way sometimes. It's easy to separate out. But then some people will go as far now as to reverse it and grow their entire plant in the straw bale and have it where they just put a little bit of soil in the top of that straw bale. The big thing is having your wires or your string going horizontally and not at the top, because you don't want to be cutting in or cutting wires or anything. But from there, you're kind of doing that same idea of the hugelkultur, which the lasagna method of adding in those different pieces to it, where you're adding these different layers, and then from there you're planting your plant right inside of that. And what's nice is that holds water really well. That straw just, you know, you put straw down on muddy paths because it absorbs water so well. So it's nice for especially some water retention with it, and again, especially in a space that you've never gardened in before. If you're like, okay, I want something kind of quick and different, try it out just with one bale in that area, and that can kind of define your space a little bit more. And down at the bottom, I love, they use these cattle panels, which you can get at like hardware stores. They're like 4x4 spacing in between these steel rods, and they make this mesh. And then they probably use like these stakes. Some people call them they're called T-posts that you stick into the ground, and then you are wrapping that up and covering it as a greenhouse. And then in the summer, they took that covering off and made it into their trellis system, which we're gonna talk about trellises just in a few slides from now. So I'll talk about that more, but just to mention, hey, there's more than you can do than just like sticking your tomato plant or your lettuce plant or your pepper plant in there. You could be doing even vining bushes and or vining peas and beans and those, or loofah, or lots of fun things. So we're gonna go through more of that in the future, but it's nice because you have less soil needed, less water needed, and it'll hold heat a lot better too in the spring and in the fall. Yeah, so I talked about that. I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah. Now next here, I kind of slipped with the word already, hugelkultur. That's what that word means. And so it's kind of like a mound that you're building over the top. This isn't a super common method, though. The places I see this method most is like wetland, really woodsy areas. So if you have something like that in your landscape, this is nice for using any of that, lots of brush that you're used to having and not knowing what to do with. This is a great way that you can dig it in and then cover with leaves, cover it with more compost, different straw, layers of wood, and then soil. And then the big thing with this too is you can use it almost as a damming feature for water runoff. So like if say you have a little valley at the bottom, you have a hill coming down to it, and at that bottom of that valley you also have a little bit of space that you want to do your garden. Right before the end of that the beginning of that valley, you can add that mound, and all your water runoff is coming into that mound and capturing, because you're building it perpendicular. So I say notice water runoff and place mound perpendicular to water flow. We're going to talk about this at the end, just a taste about site inspection, because I want you guys to, at the end, we're going to get some homework about what to look at in your yard. But water runoff, little spoiler alert, water runoff is a thing to just be looking at this time of year, especially because you can see, where is it muddy? Where am I like heavy traffic? Where am I seeing mud every year or weeds every year? And just noticing, especially spots that puddle every year for you, maybe there's a lot of compaction down below that if you want to be growing there. Maybe you need to be opening that up a little bit and putting down compost, putting down some different, maybe you need to be growing different plants in that area. So instead of forcing nature to do what we want, where we want, and then sunshine as well. So I didn't even talk about this yet, and I think we need to maybe take a second and pause and talk about sunshine. In almost all of our growing, we're gonna be wanting to look for sunshine, because it's easier to grow, add shade. It is not easy to add sun and move your neighbor's house or move your neighbor's tree. So really, as we're going, and we're gonna talk about this a ton more at the very end when I talk about our homework, but just know that when I talk about any of these designs, and you're thinking about implementing them in your own landscape, also think about your sun and your water as we're going through. So I should have put that as a reminder for myself at the beginning. I put it at the end as well. So that is a hugelkultur, and that's something that you can use, especially if you have some water runoff things that you want to hold on to. My photos for some reason not show right there, but if there's a slope or a ditch uphill, this is exactly explaining it in just a kind of different way, where deep bed farming, and this is the one I really wanted to show you. I'm mad that didn't show up for you. But basically, I wonder if I refresh it. I'll have to send you guys these photos afterwards. But there is little trenches that you're building in, and this is in Africa that they're doing deep bed farming specifically for water retention. So they're having it where it's a trench inlet, like a little slit, and then their water is all accumulating, and right next to it you have your plants growing. So if there's a slope or the ditch is uphill of the river, it serves as a dam for that water in heavy rains. And then it's closed off at the end, so it's just a small little pond pretty much. And then stabilizing plants are grown right next to it. So it's not the plants that you're harvesting, but it's just to stabilize that pond and have it available for that water for your plant to grow and save that water. So next, I think, oh yeah, I'll talk about this and then I'll talk about rain gardens, which is kind of what I was leading towards. So this is a nice little example of a combo of all the things I just talked about. So hugelkulturs, lasagna methods, straw bale methods. This is and terracing even too. So this straw bale garden requires less soil, less water to hold heat. As the straw bale breaks down, those nutrients are helping feed that plant. And then combining the straw surround with the hugel interior topped by the lasagna layering is an excellent way to just get that beautiful soil in an area that's maybe super gross and has never been able to grow plants right there. So it's a nice option and I like how they kind of buttered up containers at the end too, and gave a little example of just how you can add, with a couple straw bales and a little bit of extra soil amendments, a beautiful kind of display in your landscape with containers on the sides there too. So rain garden, getting back to understanding kind of our water. This is another great couple links that I have on there, and especially if you do live in kind of a more swamp area or wetland area, this is some great plant listings for all like native to Wisconsin down at the bottom here from the UW system. But it's that idea of looking at where you have depressions in the soil, as well as if you have puddling, maybe it's not a depression in the soil, maybe you just have really lots of clay and compaction in that spot. So looking at your landscape then, and planting in a depression where there's runoff from roofs or driveways or other surfaces or just that erosion line, and then planting so that it can soak back that water naturally rather than running off continuously. I'm going to be talking more about runoff in future classes because keeping that ground covered, there's studies done every single time there is a farm conference, because it just shows them how much bare soil versus a little bit of covering of mulch versus roots changes your runoff literally 100%. From being 100% that water comes down and runs over and keeps going down the line versus infiltrating down that root system into the ground. So it's amazing how when you have the ground covered, how much it changes your water infiltration and changes that runoff, where maybe you have an area that has been a pond in the past and now you have gardens growing all around it, and now that pond doesn't get full because you have water going down instead of over. So we'll be talking about that more in the future, but rain gardens are a great option for even having it as your water supply next to your plant. So when I was talking about that Africa deep bed method, it's almost like this in that they're growing some stuff in that area that's low, deep roots going deep into the ground, so they don't have to worry about that rain being there. But then when the rain is there, it follows deep in, and then they have preferred plants on the side, so that you're growing, but you're not getting in that pond or not getting in that water system, but it's next to it. Does that make sense? I wish that photo would have shown up for us on the deep bed, but it's that idea of using your water system as kind of part of your self-watering tool. Because water and sun, that's gonna be your two biggest things. And this next system that I'm talking to you about is probably the most evaporation, because this system is just traditional rows like victory gardens, but this is a direct descendant of pre-industrial agriculture, where you had the plow and the horse and you were doing a furrow and a line, and it's basically how this is why we have corn in rows, this is why we have soy in rows, this is why we have everything in rows, is for harvesting convenience. And when we start to add diversity, it's not easy to harvest that one preferred crop that's going to be ready to harvest. Whereas if you hand harvest, which is what we're all doing, you can do way different stuff than just a straight line. But it's a nice organized way to do it. It's very pleasing to the eye when you're looking through and you have all this kind of structure within it, but it usually does have more weeds and less crops per yard. So because you have all this space in between, your roots of these other, all of that food web down below, all of those relationships happening down below are so far away from each other, they can't be friends and help out, you know? So having roots ground covered in roots is helping your beneficial plants. As long as they aren't covering up that sun for your other plant, that below ground, it's not like it's taking water from your plant. It's not like it's taking all the nutrients from your plant. We're gonna talk about companion planting in future ones. And while, yes, you can have some issues with certain plants not wanting to work together, there's so much to be said about God's design wants us to have the ground covered. He wants us to be fruitful and multiply. That means plants too. That means having as many diversity and abundance of them as you can. So traditional rows, this is also a really good podcast on the corner there that I have linked for the Victory Garden. That's all World War II food and gardening and super, if you're into history at all or into like the history of food, it's a really good website, really good podcast. And she did a great episode about Victory Gardens. So I had to link that there. Now, this next method is like traditional rows, but instead you're going by the square foot. So you're able to plant a lot closer together and able to plant with a lot more diversity and independence of what you're growing. So this is my dad's favorite method, and I kind of tend to agree with him on it sometimes because if you don't know how much you want to grow of something, this takes it down to a science of I'm planting this many per square foot, and it's gonna give me this much yield. So this guy, Mel Bartholomew, his book down in the corner, he's considered like the godfather of square foot, and he says that you can grow the same amount of food in 20% of the space that you grow and save time and money in the process. So definitely checking out square foot gardening if you're really restricted on space and you're wanting to like get not overplant, not underplant. In general, I tell people I'd rather you overplant and have to prune back and cut back than underplant and have bare soil and not have that web, that life going on down below to keep feeding the above ground. But dividing your garden beds into 4 feet. So you know how before with the raised bed, I was showing how they were all kind of similar width. He has got this down to the science of that 4 by 4 foot kind of idea, so you can get to it at any point. You got a question, Charlie?
Not a question, comment.
Yeah.
In the slides you gave us, it does show up those 2 pictures.
Oh, it does. That's good to know. So yes, if you guys want to check that out on your phone, it's just kind of a nice visual to see, and especially if there's one thing I know for sure, this year's going to be different than last year, and I have no idea what the weather is going to bring. But what we should have is that diversity of things growing. So some deep roots, some shallow roots, so that if we have super bad rain, if we have no rain, we have things that are ready to grow in each environment. Because it's never going to be the perfect corn year every year. It's never going to be the perfect one plant every year. Every year we're going to maybe have a lot of rain at one point and then no rain for a long time. And then a lot of rain at one point and then no rain for a long time. That's what we're seeing as a pattern throughout. So having deep-rooted plants that are going to infiltrate that water in when we do get it, and then shallow-rooted plants that can work off of that deep root next to it. So having that kind of mindset of I want some deep roots that stay in the ground forever. So I'll be talking about that more as we go through. There's some more resources. One tiny piece I'm not going to go crazy on, but I want to, and see you're going to know why, is this little compost bin. They have a little cardboard bucket in the middle of their bin, or in the middle of their bed. You want to know why they have that? Is for food waste, for scraps, for composting. They have some holes put into that cardboard, and then you can put a little bit of soil, a little bit of all those lasagna things, as well as some food waste, and then worms are going to be attracted towards that and decompose that. So that's like a really cool way to do some in-ground composting and also take care of food scraps pretty passively. I'll be talking more about that in the future because there's better methods now than just that cardboard box. This is a picture of my parents' square foot garden on the left side there where you can see some terracing, and that's all just walking onion that's been left there. This is like a late May, early June photo on the left, and yeah, it's one of those I sometimes just like to show people because they also have these little hoop house things that they do for a cold frame in the spring, and then in the winter or in the summer they'll use it as a shade cloth for their lettuce. So just that little half PVC on the top of, and this is their square foot garden. He put little screws on the inside of these spots, and he does a little string going across because he is that way. I'm more of a clumper and like a feel with it. So everyone's got their ways. And he's very successful and I get to enjoy his food, so I can't complain. But yeah, so he's got his rhubarb kind of like gated off too, because there's another, like he's got one bed right here and then he's got it crossed over like that. So even though they say 4x4, you can change that into a rectangle as long as you can get to that middle, as long as your width is 4 foot. That's the biggest thing with a square foot garden, so that you can get to that middle without having to romp through all your others, because they're jam-packed with plants otherwise. Like in this middle of the summer, there's no way I'm walking in the middle of that stuff, because there's so many plants going in the middle. Now terracing is what we're gonna talk about next, and I know I had some, go ahead, John.
What's those arches, what is that, was that?
So that's basically like a cold frame is what I'm talking about, which is
The white
anything
arches?
to create that greenhouse effect. So he used PVC pipe.
Okay, PVC.
And then he has little stakes in the ground, like rebar stakes, and then he just pushes that on top of that, and that tension is all that's holding it in. He doesn't have to like screw it in and stuff. So that's really a nice option. And then, like I said before, shade cloth, that's just like, you could use a sheet bed. You could use any white sheet or something. And because the lettuce is great in the cool season, like you guys could start lettuce pretty soon here, and you can do it in the fall, but in the summer, it's a really hard plant to grow. So if you're trying to grow summer lettuce, you do want to give it some shade or something to keep it cool during the middle of the hot days. So yeah, that's a nice little option. And then you can see too, he's got some terracing too for an arch, which we've done cucumbers on that before. We've done a lot of like morning glory and other flowering stuff, but you know, it's fun just to try different things every year and pull out what didn't work and realize, hey, this is just not that thing, that's okay, versus feeling like it's all a waste. Like you do learn things, even from the hard times. Now, trellising is gonna be, like I was saying before, you could use, like he was using those flat little gates. One of my favorite methods is on the right side there, and we actually do something similar. Instead though, I have little little pieces of wood going on those perpendiculars and then wires across, instead of that cattle panel, that 4x4 fencing thing. And I like using that for like tomatoes. I like using that for cucumbers. I also like having that if I have raspberries to kind of hold them into their place. So instead of having that cattle panel in between, I have perpendicular posts and then cables coming across. I'll have photos of that in future times too, just to show you guys. And then knowing that trellising is just teaching. It's just teaching it to go vertical. And so sometimes you might use twine, or you might use cordage, or maybe you use what you have of like a bunch of PVC pipes or metal cordage, or like they have these like bamboo shoots that they're going cross and forth. And the idea is that any vining plant you have, so like our peas, our beans, our cucumbers, or even our tomatoes, anything that needs that support as it grows vertically, we're gonna ideally come through, and that's like your garden therapy, is check on it, see how it's going, make sure it's getting watered well, and keep training it up that line. So especially when you're doing raised bed, this is something to think about. If you have an elevated, I mean, if I'm starting off already at waist height and I'm trying to grow a tomato plant that's 4 feet higher than me, that's pretty high off the ground. So just think about that maybe a little bit, and then think about, maybe can I train it to go sideways? Maybe can I train it to go some other, like, because you've probably seen it, those infomercials back in the day where you grow tomatoes upside down. It's one of those things. Terracing is that idea of training the plant to go in the direction you want it to go. So if you're already growing in a raised thing and you want to grow something that grows 4 feet tall, think about how you're going to train it so that you can still reach it. Yeah, and then I also have this kind of idea, so you can do like cantaloupes, you can do melons, and the weight in pumpkins and squashes, and depending on the vine and the health of the vine and the weight of that plant, you might need to give it a little extra support. So some, like, you'll see it where people use like nylons or old tights and stuff and tie those up on the posts or on along your trellising, or like I see people use like fruit net down there, like from packages. But just know that you're just supporting it along the way, and then also while you're looking at it, see if it's growing into that, and just kind of train it so that that food is not, or that fruit, whatever it is, isn't just like melding into whatever your support is, because sometimes you see it where people will try to grow a square melon and they grow it in like this cube thing. So when you give it a support, sometimes it grows in the shape of that support. So you can experiment with that too, that can be fun. Grow it in one of those square ice cream pails, just try it, it's kind of fun. Now, next up is container planting. And so we were talking about this a little bit before as far as watering and drainage. I put it at the top here. This is one of my favorite ways actually for containers, is to have 2 containers. One slightly higher, whether I use a brick or something down below, and then having a cord or a rope, something that is gonna hang down from my top one into the bottom one, and then I water from the bottom, and then that's like my self-watering system. So, did I include a photo? I didn't. Okay, so it's basically you're filling up that bottom one with water, and then that rope is wicking that water up to the top one. So on the top, I said this top tip, use 2 containers with a rope hanging down from the top container and the space in between for water retention. Sometimes in the summer when we are gone for a weekend or something, things can dry out pretty quickly, especially if we don't have mulching or things covering it. So having some backup plans like that are kind of nice, especially for container systems on like apartments or decks and things like that. And like, you know, you have this beautiful lettuce, it looks really sad when it's dry. So you don't want to have this nice head of lettuce that lasted you for a while that you kept coming back to, and now just after a weekend of letting it dry out, you don't get any more lettuce. So monitoring moisture, and then like in the middle here, I have a little kind of lettuce container. I will continue to plant more lettuce. I won't just plant all of my seeds at once. I'll wait a week or 2 weeks and plant some more. And that way, throughout the season, I'm able to continuously eat from this one little container, and I call my salad bowl. And so that's kind of a nice way, especially because when you're picking, we're gonna talk about this more when we talk about plant selection, but when you're picking out what plants you wanna grow, don't grow a ton of beans if you never buy beans at the grocery store, you know? Like, it's easy to grow things that you're like, oh, that's cool, that's fun, and then you realize, I don't wanna eat that. Not like I've done that before or been mad at my dad for growing tons of pole beans, and I'm like, what are we gonna do with dilly beans for 5 years? If you guys need dilly beans, just saying. But avoid containers made from pressure treated wood or containers that have previously stored chemicals. I know some people will do like 5-gallon buckets as their garden thing, and that works out pretty well. Like we have in Waterloo, there's a pickle factory. Sometimes you can get free 5-gallon buckets from them. That's totally fine. If you're getting them from like Johnsonville or other places where you might have either a strong chemical. I'm trying to think of the right word, but yeah, a strong chemical that might have been used to disinfect that because they were using something that needed a high disinfectant. Let's maybe not use those, because you know everything is connected. So that little bit of whatever residue is in there, no matter how good I think I'm cleaning it, could affect the life of my plant, and then also the microbes in the soil below my plant. Yeah, strawberries are a nice one too, as far as a way to get away from the rabbits, away from some of these pests and predators, which we're talking about pests and predators in the 4th week. But yeah, that's a nice container garden thing that if you take it in, especially in the winter, and just try to keep it in that dormant or bring it back out in early spring, it usually is okay. And then you're getting perennial strawberries. You have a lifetime supply of strawberries. I'm sorry, sign me up for that deal. Because they will send out runners too, and they'll continue to spread slowly. Having multiple of them at once so that they can help with pollination. But they're, especially if you get a nice good clump of them, you're able to get them to come back the next year, and then you can share with friends. Yeah, I've gotten almost all of my strawberries, and this is only my 2nd year really with a garden bed now. And so I've gotten my strawberries all from people who've had runners and had like a big patch of strawberries that they're like, oh yeah, sure, it's going on my pavement. And I'm like, give me everything. So just know that it's good, again, to build that community of gardeners, build that community of people that you're like, hey, I know this lady, that crazy plant lady totally has some rhubarb. I'm gonna grab some of that. And then now you have a lifetime supply of rhubarb. I mean, it's amazing when we build this community connection, how much abundance we can have for each other. And honestly, that's the coolest part about God's design, is I could take one heirloom tomato and open it up and have seeds that not only will feed me and my family, but my neighbors and my community if I take care of that plant and grow those seeds. So it's kind of cool when you think about how much abundance we have available if we nurture it and take care of it. Okay, containers, we're gonna go through this list more and I'll have a more extensive one, but I just wanted to give you some percolation ideas. So in little small containers, you can do those lettuce, you can do leafy greens, herbs, kale. I have oregano that comes back every year in a pot. I have thyme that comes back. My Swiss chard, that's a biennial, which we'll talk about again, what those words mean, but I'll have one planting come back one year and then the next year I'll plant another one and then back and forth every other year with them. So that's kind of a cool thing with some Swiss chard, and especially in early spring when you're like, I just want to be outside or do something. When it's days like today and you're like, okay, let's be done, I want to go out there. It's nice to have something to harvest too with the cold weather. So medium containers, peas, eggplants, strawberries, and then in large containers, you could do some of like your bulbs and stuff. Like you could do daffodils right now. You could be doing dahlias and other bulbs in there to have nice flowers, as well as one of my favorites is potatoes. I actually prefer to grow potatoes in a container instead of in the ground, because for harvest, and for growing them, I can start off with that bag rolled down or with that burlap rolled down, add the seed potato, add some soil to it, and then as it grows, I can keep adding more soil and bringing up the sides of it, and then I have all potatoes growing down the side of that bag, and then to harvest, I just had to undo that bag versus digging super deep and adding more and more to my mound in the ground. So it's kind of a nice way to do potatoes, and they also sell like fabric cloth things that are specifically for potatoes, or you can use like burlap cloths, or you can just use a big pot and just keep adding in that pot. Now, this last little piece over here is a design principle that we're gonna come back to a bunch more, because the idea of companion planting, growing what goes together, this is permaculture. This is that idea of working with our design versus just doing rows or squares or raised beds. This is the idea of mimicking Mother Nature and then also having everything serve multiple purposes. So the edge of a forest, that's what they consider the most abundant part of the forest. That's where you're having the biggest growth. So what permaculture tries to do is make the whole garden that edge line of a forest. So really building multiple layers of, I'm just gonna go up to it, where you have like a canopy layer, and then a lower tree layer, and then a shrub layer, and then all your herbs, and then you're going down to that soil surface, and then you're doing root crops. So they're really trying to get that edge line. Now, this is a method of using the entire landscape as a functional tool with highly diverse systems of trees and understory crops. So this might not be your total jam if you're like, Angie, I live in an apartment and I just have a couple containers on my deck. But the idea of growing things in companion with each other and having things that are gonna always be growing versus at the end of the fall, I just pull everything out and I have nothing going. Like, okay, what can I leave in the ground for next year? What can I leave in the ground to build on next year and create permanent agriculture? But at the end here, I'm going to talk about like walking your landscape and understanding what to look at. And big thing that I want you to maybe take a look at if you want to is that observe patterns link, because that talks a lot about these permacultural principles of, do you have clumps already built into your planting? You'll see nowhere in nature a straight line. Everything is in like lobes or keyholes or curves, building all these edges. So can you build edges within your own containers? Can you build edges within your garden where you're creating more surface area for things? So this is, to me, a little bit more landscaping than it is just straight gardening, but it's something to consider when you're starting your garden, and especially when you're designing how you're gonna get to things, or how you're gonna utilize everything to have multiple purposes. The design in general is always trying to have very little to no human intervention. So like I was telling you about that elderberry bush that's bigger than I've ever seen, that's a great idea as like your focal piece in the very back, and not the thing that is right next to your kitchen, because it's only gonna be your harvesting in fall, and the rest of the year is gonna be this big thing in your way. What's more a better idea for permanent agriculture is, where is my herb garden that I'm going to for every meal for my kitchen? So am I having my chives, my oregano, my lettuce, all of the things that I want for constant meals as close as possible, as convenient as possible. So, especially if you have a good amount of land, or if you have enough land that you're thinking, I could have one little bed close to my house, close to my back door, and more plantings farther back, think about that idea of convenience. What's gonna be the easiest for me to grab and quick snip off a little bit and take into the kitchen? Because really, who doesn't love that? And then also making the most out of natural water and wind patterns, which I think we already kind of beat that horse before when I talked about rain and waterfall. So we're gonna go through that a lot more next week as far as site inspection and understanding what the different area, like how to read your land, how to map your land, how to design your landscape to be the most effective and efficient. Oh, here's another nice little link here actually about guild planting and just understanding how guild planting works, which is that idea of companion planting. Not just growing one plant, but growing an ecosystem for all these plants to thrive together. So ways of planting trees in a forest, like an orchard that mimics the forest edge, planted with edible plants like a natural forest, vertical layers of a food forest grow together, tall trees and then small trees and then shrubs and then herbs and then ground cover. And so using that entire edge line to get as much of that sunshine as possible versus flat lines and then everything at the end not having any. So basically that idea of at the end of where your garden ends, so the farthest to your north, you're wanting your tallest plants because you want to catch as much of that vertical planting. So to your north side where you're getting the most sun, the last part of your land, everything else can be shade beyond that. Get your tallest plants growing so you can take the most out of that vertical sun. That's what that is trying to say right there. So yeah, tall canopy trees grow inward from the edge, corresponding these smaller trees peek out from underneath, and then tall trees catch those sun rays. Shrubs step further out into that sunshine along with herbs, flowers, ground covers, blanketing the sunniest edge. So that idea of using that edge to make the most out of that sunshine, and think about the root systems below those ground. You gotta realize that too. All of that water that's coming down is able to infiltrate way more because you have all of these plants working together to hold those nutrients, to hold that water going down. So yeah, next we're gonna talk about the homework as far as for getting ready for site prep, getting ready for really designing this landscape, utilizing these different methods within it. So walking the land, where is your shade, where is your water, where is your wind patterns? And what that really means is where are the trees and the buildings shading? Where are your leaves piling up? Where's that wind like leaving all of those leaves for you? Where is there mud, bare soil? Is that from foot traffic or is that from water erosion? You can see that even as you walk out to your car today, there's erosion coming down this hill line right here because there's no roots covering that ground besides cheap Bermuda grass and tree lines. And then from here, spots where water pools and flows, and then weeds. I think sometimes we look at an area and we say we really want to grow that blueberry right there, but every year there's weeds. Let's start with an earlier in succession plant. Let's maybe start with like our early grasses or an annual plant or a lettuce or even a broccoli. Broccoli is an earlier in that planting cycle. Whereas when you get to vines and bushes, that's later and that's a harder plant to grow in general. So we're gonna talk about that more in our third class about like plant selection and just figuring out what are the right plants to grow in the right spots, but taking the time as you're walking your land to see, what do I remember from years past? What can I remember from this land in the past? Or if you're starting from scratch, maybe you're just thinking about where am I gonna be putting my water? Where am I gonna be watering in the future? How convenient is it gonna be for me to water this area? How much sunshine is it gonna get? Am I gonna have to think about shade if I wanna grow lettuce in there in the middle of the summer? Am I gonna have to think about where am I gonna put this trellis if I need it to go climbing somewhere else? So it still is a great time of year to get ready to garden, really. And then planning where you can get lots of sun and water, and then plan your plants. So I say this a lot to farmers, plan your water, then plan your plants. Because so often if you're thinking, oh yeah, it's gonna be great, there's so much drainage, but then you don't think about that drainage and how fast that water is going away, and now you're gonna be replenishing it because it's running off because you don't have that ground covered. So planning your water and then planning your plants. Like, where can I get water to go down? Where can I create some divots maybe? Create little mini ponds, create little mini spots for water to hold and then infiltrate versus just keep running off your land. So getting deep roots eventually, that's the goal, that's my goal. But for right now, that terracing system, that was my biggest thing in my garden because I knew anytime that water got to that first set of rocks, it's going down instead of continuing that gravity pull down. So that's why terracing and using these different things, I would definitely go back to that rain garden slide and look at water stories if you're just wanting different ideas for water infiltration ideas. And just seeing, there's people who use just little moon crescents, little divots in their land, add some rocks to it, add those infiltration spaces. So next week we'll be talking about that site prep. Now, I love ending with a little quote, so I gotta put a little quote at the end here. Now, we are the earth. What we do to the soil, we do to ourselves. And it is no accident that the words humus and human have the same roots. So I just want to kind of leave us with that and that idea of we are so connected to these things that we are growing and taking the time to enjoy this design versus feel the burden of it. It's the difference between enjoying your workout or enjoying, you know, the sound of the birds versus just being in this busyness mindset. So I hope that because you took the time to take this class today, you will also give yourself the blessing of taking the time in your garden. So walk the land over these next 2 weeks and then we'll come back in 2 weeks from now, okay?
I'm taking this book.
Okay, yes, and if you want to borrow any books, just bring them back in 2 weeks. So there's a bunch of really good books over there. If you can bring them back in 2 weeks, that would be perfect. And then if you have suggestions too, we had a couple people, there's scratch paper right in the back by the pens. Feel free to grab scratch paper and give suggestions.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome, you guys.